What's up? How you doing? Here we are, beautiful night, fresh cup of Lipton tea. Made some tea just now, and cheers. Delicious, delicious. Love tea. Wow. So, talk a little bit about trains. I love trains. I've spent my life messing around with trains. It all started off when I was a kid, first grade. We had a school, and you got to keep in mind, when I grew up during those years, you were allowed to roam around as a kid. You had a lot of freedom. You had money in your pocket, $1 or $2. You'd go to the store, you'd buy something, gum usually, and then you'd roam around all day. I was 5 years old, roaming around, going from one house to the next backyard to, constantly. And then sometimes I was roaming around by myself. You would not see that these days. And I don't know, it was like the normal thing to do back then, but I was always walking around, especially, after school. In first grade, I had these two friends, really good friends back then, and there was a railroad about maybe 1,000 feet or so from the school. It was built before the Civil War. And after school, we'd go there and mess around for like an hour or so, and then go home. One of my friends lived, so the railroad tracks say here, he lived on one of the houses whose backyard was right up against the railroad tracks. So after we'd leave, he would hop over the fence and go home. My other friend lived close by. It was an auto parts store, auto parts. And on the back side of that was his house. And so after school, we'd go to this area, and we'd play around. The train would come. Back then it was this old train. Now it's all, they tore out the tracks, they put new tracks. It's a whole new system there. So we'd hang around there, and like we had our own life, even as children. It was like we had two lives, one with our parents and then one with our friends. LAPD. So, had a lot of fun there. Did that for 3 years. First, second, third grade. Fourth grade, I went somewhere else, wasn't around that area, but I still, every so often, because my house was still there, so I would still walk around by the railroad tracks. And no matter where I went, all roads led back to the railroad tracks for me. And then fifth grade, a lot of time at the railroad tracks, had these new friends. I introduced them to railroad tracks. We would ride our bikes in that area and do a lot of jumping in those days, fifth grade jumping. So, 6th, 7th grade, a lot of time at the railroad tracks. Met this kid. His family came from Lebanon. We became really good friends. We had a lot in common. Talked a lot about, music, politics, things like that. He knew a lot of stuff, because he was from an area where they were exposed young in life to that kind of stuff. And so we hung around at the railroad tracks a lot, like a lot. 8th grade, a little bit less. We still did it, but not as much. And then high school, it increased again. Had this friend of mine, we take a shortcut through the railroad tracks. And one time I actually took my grandmother. My grandmother had a bit of a hard time walking far distances, and I said to her, come down. It was a really steep little trail that you had to take to get down below to the railroad tracks. And she's like, where are you taking me? I'm like, just calm down and follow me. So she went down and started walking, and she loved it. She goes, I never knew this existed. Meantime, her house was like 10 blocks away from my house. The railroad tracks divided us. We were on this side, she was on the other side. And she didn't know they existed. it was built back then in a way that it was hidden. You couldn't see it. They built it before the Civil War. Then in the 1920s, they started building houses along the way, so the houses just covered the railroad tracks up, and you couldn't see them. So she was walking. She was like looking at all the plants growing and sniffing them, and then finally we got to her house, and she's like, "Wow, this is fast this way." I go, "Yeah, because there's no, there's no traffic. There's nothing." So then when I hit 6th grade, that's when I accelerated my fascination with trains. I started riding the subway system, and I had a very bad habit of only bringing enough money for whatever I was doing that day. So if I was taking the bus, say the bus was a quarter back then, I'd bring a quarter and a quarter going, coming, right? And then I took a train, so I take the bus to train. The train back then was either 65 or 85, and I would bring enough for that, and then I would, so I would double it up basically. So 2 bus fares and 2 train fares, and then I would bring a little extra for food. I always want to, stop somewhere and have like a, back then the big thing, was I would go and sell the world's finest chocolates, and inside they had a coupon, and the coupon in those days was for Burger King. It would say, if you buy a Junior Whopper, get free fries. So I had a bunch of those, and I would incorporate that into my spending. So I would go ride the trains all day. My parents had no idea. You tell them, that's my mother now. She's like, "Yeah, you were downstairs somewhere." I go, "Yeah, that's where I was. I was downstairs." So I would ride them all day, and I was fascinated. I would be on all the lines, and they were all electric, so they had that smooth acceleration, and I loved, being on the big lines, the ones that would go far out. I remember one time I ended up at the beach in the wintertime. It just snowed, and I was walking on the sand with tons of snow on top. So, but I loved everything. I mean, I would disappear. It was like, in the tunnel system, I would just blend in. And one of the stops had a Dunkin' Donuts, and I would have enough money for a donut, and then I'd eat that, get back on, and ride around all day again. One day I was leaving downtown, and as I'm passing by that area, I notice a door open up. And I've mentioned this before, but door opens up, and I can hear the sound of arcade toy games in there. So I look inside. I was out of money at that point. I only had enough money to get home, and it was loaded. It was dark inside. It had all the best games in the world. Any kid today, or any person my age today, would love it if they could find a place that had all those arcade games again. So anyway, following week I went back, and that became part of my stop. Bring a few dollars for that too. But I never brought enough money for anything other than what I planned on doing. A couple of times I ran out of money. Somehow I misestimated how much I needed, and I ended up walking home. So, but anyway, I used to ride every train you can imagine in my area. I've been on multiple times, and I knew the subway system inside out. One time, if it wasn't for the third rail, I would jump down there and walk around the tracks. There's a scene in Superman where they have Lex Luthor's secret, secret house down in the subway system, and you could walk on the tracks, and one of those opening things would pull back and you could go in, or it could push you out and you'd go into the train. So I always wanted to walk the train system. Never did it like that. You end up touching the third rail by accident. You think they would have had a safer system, where it wasn't exposed like that. And I don't know if you've been on a railroad with the third rail. It's easy to touch that. Somebody could push you hard and you'll land on it, and then you'll shrivel up because that's a lot of voltage. So yeah, that was the thing. Riding the trains, buses. I've been on buses like you can't imagine. And even now, I go down to El Cajon. That's the major freight train line down there, and I've been doing that for like 15, 16 years now, maybe a little bit longer. Go down there, and I love the freight trains. Freight trains are awesome. When we go to Williams, I love the trains there. One time my bride bought tickets, so we went from Williams to the Grand Canyon by train. There was something about it, locomotive. Even that sounds like there's power there. You know, just... I remember one scary, it's a little bit scary as a kid. Now you're like, you know, big deal. But I was on the train with my mother. We were going downtown. My aunt lived there and still lives in the same place today. Still there. And we were going to go visit her. The train, it's one stop before it goes into the subway system. So the doors open up. I was little. Could have been like maybe 2 years old, something like that. And my mother gets up and she thinks I'm behind her. Doesn't look. That's how independent we were back then. They didn't really look and see, is he behind me or not. So she steps out, and I was a little bit further back than she thought, and the door started to close, and I could see the door like that, and I put my hand through and I got out, and my mother didn't even notice. And I remember thinking, you know, kind of breathing heavy internally. I was thinking, wow, what was I going to do if those doors closed? You know, I mean, you're 2 years old. Where are you going to go? You know, I mean, I could have gone to the next stop, but would my mother have figured that out? I don't think so. It would have been a situation where I would have, you know, gone lost. Probably I would have located a police officer, right? Or somebody who works for the train system, and they probably would have helped me out. That's probably what would have happened. But I always remember that. My mother got up, and I was way, you know, behind her, and the door started to close. But yeah, I've always wanted to do a long train ride, but I want to get one of those cars where you could sleep, right? I want to be sitting in a chair for like, you know, 6 days. But I want to go from Miami, cut through the country somehow, maybe go straight up all the way to Maine, then go west across, then somewhere go through Canada, go up to Yellowknife, cut through into Alaska, go the furthest north to Alaska that you can possibly go by Amtrak, do some kind of loop, come back down, cut through Washington, Oregon, you know, but everywhere you go you want to stop for a little bit. You know, I'd like to go to that Crater Lake, and then go down through California, go down, end up through Arizona, go New Mexico, you know, Texas, all, and do a huge ride like that to see every detail. I took a train one time years ago, and there was a bomb scare in I forget where the bomb scare was, but there was a bomb scare, so we had to cut across and go through Reno, and Reno added time. It was really far out, so you had to, you know, they wanted to make a loop, and you know, there was a bomb scare at some place near the tracks. So we went around it, and the conductor, he gets on later on, he goes, we've lost a lot of time doing that, but we're going to try and make it up tonight by going a little bit faster. And I said, all right, I'm good with that. So, eat the meal, you get back there, I'm sitting in my chair, you get drowsy, you fall asleep, and I was in a deep sleep, and the train was flying on the tracks. It was like, I could feel the momentum, because every time there was a slight, you know, you felt like the train was lifting off the tracks. It wasn't, but it felt that way, and it was going so fast. I was trying just to sleep to get past that, because it was like terror in the train. At that speed, I felt like we were going to collide with something. Yeah, it was like that uncomfortable fast, you know, like when you're in a car with somebody and the speed limit's 75 and they're doing like 108, and you feel like the car's a little bit out of control. Well, that's how the train felt that night. It felt out of control, and we made up the lost time. But yeah, we were flying on those tracks, and you know, a train, it's dark out, anything could step in front of it. You know, you could have a human, you could have, not that the human's going to derail the train, it's not going to derail the train, but it's just the thought, you know, that you're going so fast, you're stuck on the train tracks, you can't, you know, go around something. And then there's places where, little towns, you would hear the conductor pull the horn because, you know, cars, there's roads, and so you have to get those arms to go down so the cars can, you know, realize there's a train coming. There's been, you know, I mean, you can go on YouTube and see videos, or you must be on YouTube now, but you'll see videos of trains colliding with 18-wheelers and all sorts of things. Train always wins. And I'll tell you a story. I had a friend, we would go vacationing, and they lived in that town permanently, year-round. In the winter, it was dead. Like 80% of the population was not there. 80% of the houses were vacant, and they lived down there year-round. Very few people did that back then. Now it's different. Now it's more people. And he had a father and a mother. They enjoyed a little bit of a drinky poo quite often throughout the day. So both his parents were lit throughout the day, but the mother was a mean drunk. And the father, he seemed like a mean guy too. He never talked to me, but he looked like he was edgy. And mother would get out yelling sometimes if she had too much to drink, start yelling in the streets. But they lived in a quiet, you know, neighborhood. It was just them. Nobody would notice her. So I had that impression about the father. The mother ended up dying. Father was alone. So one day, many years later, now I'm all grown up, and I'm down in that area, and it's winter time. It's around Christmas time, and I'm on that street, and I'm looking, and I see some guy coming in my direction walking a dog. And I start realizing who it is. It's my friend's father. He recognized me, so he came over, he started talking to me, and I realized what a misconception I had about the man. Really nice guy, great personality, very friendly. We talked for about a half hour. And I was tempted to tell him, I thought you were like a mean person. I didn't realize how nice, you know, very nice guy. So that was the last time I saw him. I think he died a few years after that, but he was up there in age. He lived a full life, despite the fact that he you know, enjoyed a little drinky poo once in a while. So one day, how old? I must have been maybe 14 years old, somewhere around there. They never allowed you in the house at the beginning. I guess they didn't feel comfortable, but then after they'd allow me to come in the house briefly. So I would go in the house, and they had a bar. The father made the kitchen to look like you were in a bar, commercial bar. And they would sit there, the two of them, with the TV up top like a bar, and they would drink all day watching television, the two of them. And then we'd go in the, you know, back there. They had chickens back there and everything in the backyard. So one day, I'm 14, and it was raining. Summertime, it was raining, and we had nothing to do. And he goes, "Hey, you want to come to my house?" I was thinking in my head, is that allowed? So I said, sure. He goes, "I want to show you something." So he takes me to his house. No one was home. And he pulls down, you know, that in the ceiling, the attic, you can pull down the steps. And he takes me upstairs, and I saw something amazing. His father had converted the entire attic into a train system. You know, the model trains. He built a whole town, and it went all the way around the perimeter of the attic. And I was blown away with the details. All the little buildings, trees, bushes, tracks all over the place. The big trains that he would put on there, and he had this big controller. He would control the trains, and we were up there all day playing with the train system. He says, "My father likes trains." Should have known the guy was cool just from the fact that he liked the trains. So that was the first time I went up there, and the last time. Never ended up where, I ended up in the attic again. But it was mind-blowing. I always wanted to say, hey, can I check that out again? But I don't even know if they still have that house. I know both parents have died. I know the son and his two sisters are still around, but I don't know if they still own that house. If I ever ran into him, she'll look him up on Facebook or something. If I ever ran into him, I would ask him, hey, what happened with the trains that your father had up in the attic? So yeah, it was so beautiful. I'd like to get a Lionel train set, a good one though. One of those really nice, heavy ones, nice tracks. Even as a kid, I was fascinated with train tracks, the model ones. Sometimes they would buy me the racetrack, the cars. Those never stayed on the track. They'd always fly off somewhere. But the trains were cool. Somebody, I forget, it was probably like an uncle or something for Christmas, bought me a big, heavy-duty train set. And I put it all together in my attic, put the train on. I had this really heavy module that would control the speed. And I was up there for hours playing with my trains. Yeah. And back then they were made out of heavy material. Now you'll spend like $600-700 and it'll be all plastic, fake. Trains and airplanes. Even airplanes, I have a fascination with 747s especially. When I was little, we ended up going on a trip. I was 3 years old and we went on a trip. And I still remember it, even though I was 3 years old, the memory survived, and I still remember the details of what happened during that trip. So I remember a couple of weeks or so before the whole, flight, every relative was coming over and saying, where you gonna go? Where you gonna go on? I'm gonna plane. I'm gonna be on a plane. And they would bring me model airplanes and all that. My uncle bought me one. They wouldn't fly back then, but it was like I think it was a Pan Am about that size, and put those big 9 lives batteries inside that would last like 20 minutes, and he'd flip the switch, had the blinking lights, it would move, it had the engine noise and everything. And I played with that like forever. I was fascinated with airplanes, loved them, loved going and flying. Yeah, my first flight was amazing. I was like looking out the window. Everything was getting smaller and smaller. You don't have a fear as a kid. You don't say, it might crash. You don't think that way. So, but it was fun, like really fun. I've never been on a helicopter. Someday. I always see the ones that fly over the Grand Canyon, and I tell my bride, we should take one of those. And she's like, yeah, those... They don't look safe. They look very dangerous. So, yeah, when a helicopter drops, it drops. A plane, especially a smaller one, can glide a little bit, and maybe you'll have a chance of surviving. But a helicopter, once those propellers stop, you're going down. You're going down. There's nothing saving you. So, yeah, that's my thing. Like to take a long train ride. Interesting places though, not just, I remember when I took the train ride, we went through Colorado. Beautiful. It's just amazing how it looked. Those mountains, and I was watching a video, somebody was saying that the Colorado mountains don't belong there. Apparently they do. They're there. So I don't know why we humans can decide that they don't belong there, but he said that there's no tectonic plate system there that would have them smashing into each other to create the mountains. Because usually mountains like that are on the coast, or what used to be a coast. So in other words, like the Himalayan mountains, you have the northern part of India, Pakistan, right, colliding with China, Nepal, and as they hit, they create the mountain range. But he says in Colorado that doesn't exist. So he goes, they can't explain why there are mountains in Colorado, the Rocky Mountains. Says they shouldn't be there because there's no tectonic plate that would separate that area so it would collide. So it would be like Colorado east of Colorado and west of Colorado were separate at one point, and then over time, they came closer and closer until they collided and then created the mountain range. But he says that doesn't exist. So technically there shouldn't be any mountains there, but they're there. So got to come up with a different theory. How we doing on time here? Time is 11:13, February 11th, Wednesday, 2026. Well, tomorrow we start again. That's all it is. It's a series of just days with brief periods of time to do stuff. You do stuff that day, create memories, go to sleep, wake up, do a little bit more, go to sleep, wake up, do a little bit more, and that's all it is. And then one day you run out of days. When you make videos and you go back and you start looking at some of them, you realize time is actually longer than you think when you're actually able to capture it and look at it again. It's a lot of time. You don't remember it, and it seems like it flew by, but that's because you don't remember most of it. You remember the key moments, but you don't remember all the little details. Like, you know, when you scratch your head, you don't remember, you don't remember that stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna go inside, probably watch maybe a little bit, maybe if Steve Harvey Family Feud is on, I'll watch that. I'm a big fan of Steve Harvey and Family Feud. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.